For the last few weeks, one thing we've been talking about, the subtle sort of hidden message in the message, while we talked about necessary sins, while we talked about consumer Christianity, we were talking about comfort zones. And one of the things I love, and I wish we had it today, would be this nice big cup of coffee, because I've only had 2 cups today so far. But who here is a coffee drinker? Raise your hand. So who here is not a coffee drinker? Raise your hand. You guys are sick, and I will pray for you. Bunch of sickos. But so, I love that first sip of coffee. Doesn't matter if it's the morning, afternoon, evening, but it's that first sip of coffee, and it just hits you just right. And just imagine, everybody close your eyes, and just imagine that first sip of coffee, and it just hits you just right, doesn't it? It makes you like you're able to talk to the world, as long as the world doesn't talk to you until after you're done with your coffee. But it's just so comfortable. It tastes good. We find comfort in a lot of things, a lot of dysfunctions. We call them necessary sins sometimes. We talked about that for weeks. We also find comfort in consumer Christianity. That's where we make it about ourselves. We've made Jesus our butler. We sat there and we turned Jesus into a genie. We rub the Bible, and all of a sudden Jesus pops out, and we go, yes, please fix my life. I made a mess of it. And then as soon as our lives are getting better, we put the Bible back on the shelf. See, the problem is, though, following Christ isn't always comfortable. And we've become devoted to the wrong comforts, the wrong things. We started talking about being devoted to Christ, about being an Acts 2 church. So let's pull out our handy-dandy bulletins. I've got 2 of them up here. So there's a page in one of them that says church values up at the top. So you have some churches, they're known for their music programs. Others for their children or youth programs, and some others seem to have some sort of niche that appeals to a large audience. And each of those ministries, they can be good and they can be helpful. It's towards the back somewhere probably. They can be good and they can be helpful for both reaching our community and encouraging the church. But it's interesting if we look back at what the church has actually devoted themselves to. And here at Holy Cross, we're devoted to emulating an Acts 2 church. And what does Acts 2 church mean? It means that the people, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to the prayers. We're devoted to Christ as we live out our beliefs, our values, our mission, and our vision. So what is the mission of the United Methodist Church? It's to make disciples of Christ for the transformation of the world. Well, what do we value when it comes to how we live that out? What we value are the fruits of a healthy church, which is radical hospitality, passionate worship, intentional faith development, risk-taking mission and service, and extravagant generosity. And our vision of a church is to be a community church where people experience a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ in a welcoming church family environment. And our mission is to live out our values and our vision by loving God and loving others. 5 fruits of an Acts 2 church. It's a new commitment. It's a new devotion. It's what are we devoted to? So we began with hospitality as we're talking about how to devote ourselves to being that New Testament church. Hospitality, but not just any hospitality, but radical hospitality. Also, we talked about generosity, but not just any generosity, extravagant generosity. And so today we're talking about missions and service. And not just any missions and service, but it's risk-taking missions and service. In other words, it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable missions and service. This isn't doing missions and service in a way that's familiar. that requires very little time or very little effort. This may not even be mission and service that makes us feel good. This is mission and service that is bold, calls us out of our comfort zone. So I remember teaching at Frostburg State, and I had this one class, and I don't remember the class. It was leadership or was ethics, one of the two, can't remember exactly. But I was going up and down the aisles, and I was giving my lecture, and we were getting ready to have a Q&A session, and one of the students raises their hand, and I'm like, what do you want? And he goes, Professor. I go, yes. I didn't really say yes, but let's think I did. Let's think I was being polite. And I said, yes. And he goes, you really like taking us out of our comfort zone, don't you? And I said, yes, I do. I live for that. Because you don't learn in your comfort zone. You learn outside of your comfort zone. And mission and service that is risk-taking, is bold, and calls us out of our comfort zone. It breaks the mold. It breaks the mold. It unsettles us. And it's as if Jesus Christ himself was who we were serving. And that's precisely the scenario we find in our scripture today. A story told by none other than Jesus Christ. The sheep and the goats. The sheep and the goats, as it's commonly known. And it's familiar to a lot of us. It tends to evoke conversations about heaven, about hell, about rapture. You know, when it all happens, who's going where? Don't we all want to know where we're going? And that's a problem for us, though. Because as long as we think this story is about heaven and hell, as long as we think it's about the afterlife, we're missing the whole reason this story was even told. Jesus is not asking that we focus on the life hereafter. He wants us to focus long and hard on the life we're living right now. And we know the storyline. There are sheep and there are goats. The sheep tend to the least of these, and the goats don't. The sheep are rewarded. The goats are punished. And it's notable, I think, that neither of them knew it was Jesus they were actually helping or not. They just did what came naturally. So if you could, let's turn to Matthew 25. Matthew 25, 31 to 46. Matthew 25. Matthew 25, 31 through 46. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then these righteous ones will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will say, I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you did not feed me. I was thirsty, and you did not give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me into your home. And I was naked, and you did not give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. And then they will reply, but Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you? And he will answer, I tell you the truth. When you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go to eternal life. And so is the word of the Lord. Amen. So now we could wonder all day long why the goats failed to feed the hungry or give water to the thirsty, why they didn't welcome the stranger or clothe the naked, why they didn't visit the imprisoned or care for the sick. And it's possible they're just bad, uncaring people who never would have done those things anyway. But I'm not sure we can, or I'm not sure we even should, explain it that way and explain it that easily. I mean, we assume these folks would have, imagine these folks would have rolled out the red carpet had they known it was Jesus, right? Imagine Jesus comes to your house. They would have served him the best food. They would have made him a welcome guest in their homes. They would have invited all of their friends over. You'll never guess who's here. Yeah, it's him. It's Jesus. You got to come over here. They would have taken pictures. He would have been Facebook famous. He would have been all over everybody's Instagram feed. He would have been all over TikTok. Even TikTok. The local newspaper would have done a feature story. And when Jesus said goodbye, they would have never stopped talking about the day that they got to help the Lord Jesus Christ. But Jesus doesn't come to them and doesn't come to us like Jesus, does he? And that's the crux of it. Jesus comes in a totally unexpected way. And not to trick or fool anybody, but so people can see him for who he really is. See, Jesus comes consistently and intentionally as the least of these. As inconspicuously as possible. And that's just a little unsettling, wouldn't you think? It's unsettling first because it literally means that anyone we meet during the course of our lives could be, is really Jesus himself. The lady that we cut off in traffic driving to work because we were late. The salesperson on the other end of the line who kept calling when we were having dinner. The random person behind us at the grocery store checkout, even worse. Those people that are walking too slow in Walmart in front of you. How do we interact with those people? Do we even interact with them at all? What about that person that leaves the buggy in the center of the aisle at the grocery store? Are we treating these people as if they are Jesus himself among us? And it's also unsettling because it means that when it comes to mission and service, we in the church cannot afford to play it safe or simply just dial it in. We have to take it to a different level. We have to amp it up. We're called to reverse the way our world works. And it's the same risk-taking missions and service that God has been calling us for centuries to engage in. And we as the church, the whole church, often don't do it like we should. And why is that? Number one, it's not comfortable. It takes us out of our comfort zone. It's not satisfying ourselves. It's not part of our consumer Christianity. And it's risky business to boot. Or maybe sometimes we've just missed it. So I read a study as I was preparing for this week, and it was about this individual that was asking people who claimed to be strong followers of Jesus. And he asked a question about whether Jesus spent time with the poor. So how much of a percentage of people do you think said Jesus spent time with the poor? I'll give you a second. Think about it. I'll give you a hint. Nearly 80. Nearly 80% said, yes, we think he did spend time with the poor. But later in the survey, he sneaked in another question. He asked this very same group of strong Jesus followers whether they spent time with the poor. And less than 2% said yes. And he learned a powerful lesson. He said that we can admire and we can worship Jesus without doing what he did. It's the way we live. We can applaud what he preached about and stood for without caring about those very same things. It's how we live our lives. We can adore his cross without taking up ours. It's how we live out every single day of our life. And I'd come to see that the great tragedy of the church is not that Christians do not care about the poor, do not care about the hungry, do not care about the thirsty, do not care about the sick, but that Christians don't know the poor. Christians don't know the sick. Christians don't know the broken. Christians don't know those that are struggling. Which means Christians don't know Christ. See, Christians can be very quick to serve one another. It's easy when I'm serving my sister. It's easy when I go over and I help out mom and dad. I'll get cookies over at their house if I do. But we like to help out others. We like to serve others, even the world, when it's on our own terms, not on God's terms. Because God's terms almost always involve risk. And risk-taking pushes us out of our comfort zone. Who here remembers the gentleman that came here to speak, David Hill? Raise your hand if you remember or you know who David Hill is. Don't ever give that man a microphone. He is the most talkative speaker I've ever heard. But I remember there was this guy, Paul Davis, who came to LaValle United Methodist Church, and he had this British accent, and I can't do a British accent, so I'm going to do this fake accent. And he came and he talked about prison ministry. And he talked about how, we need to volunteer to go into prison and be with the prisoners and the supermax. And we need to write letters and we need to go there and talk with them and share with them about Jesus. And meanwhile, he talked 2 years in a row about that. And I'm in the pews both of those 2 years. And I'm going, I am not going to prison. Not going to happen. And then David Hill came and he talked. And he talked about how he found Christ in prison while he was in solitary confinement, I believe. Immediately after hearing his discussion of how his relationship with God was influenced by his stay in prison and how he was able to work with others, I was like, I'm going to prison. And I remember the first day I was supposed to have a meeting here with the church staff, and Karen had set it up, and well, we had to wait on it because I had to get out of Kairos, which is the prison ministry. So, Frank, if you're listening, Frank, I always remember this one. Karen saying, well, we got to wait until such and such time because we got to wait till the pastor gets out of prison. Frank goes, we got to wait till the pastor gets out of prison to talk to him? The parole board gets tough. Risk-taking takes us out of our comfort zone. And I got to tell you, going into Supermax prison was very uncomfortable at times, especially when there was a riot, especially when fights had broken out, and the prison guards come up to us, psst, follow me. And all of a sudden, 10 of the Kairos guys, we get up and we go to another room and they lock us in because they don't have enough people to watch us. That gets pretty uncomfortable. It exposes us to people we don't already know. Stretches us beyond service to people we already know. Beyond service to people, situations, and needs that we would never, these are needs that we would never ordinarily encounter apart from our deliberate intention to serve Christ. The thing is, we need to serve these people, and we need to come to know them whether or not they ever become a part of our community of faith. See, we are here to connect to more people who can be in service and served by Christ. There are no internal motives. Only the motives of Christ. They get caught up in our heart. So they get caught up inside of us so much, they start to take root, allowing us to be a branch that bears fruit. By the way, here's that fruit again, that radical hospitality, that extravagant this, that extravagant that, risk-taking this, intentional that. And risk-taking mission and service, both the servant and the served, you will find, are transformed. And the simple but highly profound truth is this. When we serve others, we serve Jesus Christ. The stretch of Christian discipleship is to love those for whom it is not automatic that we love them. That it's not easy, that it's not common, that it's not normally accepted that we love them. To love those who do not think like us or live like us, who to express respect and compassion and mercy to those that we don't know and who may never able to reciprocate. This is the love Christ tries to pull out of each and every one of us. So risk-taking steps, it's greater uncertainty, a higher possibility of discomfort, a higher possibility of resistance, a higher possibility of sacrifice. Risk-taking mission and service takes us into ministries that push us out of our comfort zone, stretching us beyond the circle of relationships and practices that routinely define our faith communities. And here's a kicker. Churches that engage in risk-taking mission must be willing to live with disappointment. I'll never forget the look on the child. There was this one kid after school, and he since they're downstairs or outside playing, I can tell I can throw them under the bus. And he comes up to me, and he wants to know, hey, is today free cell phone day or free electronics day? And I said, no, it is not. And he goes, and I said, learn to live with disappointment. It's going to happen. You see, churches that engage in risk-taking mission must be willing to live with disappointment. They must be willing to live with failure and uncertainty. Part of the risk of real mission and service is the uncertainty of whether it will make any difference at all. It means many times we may go to great lengths to help those in our community, and it still might feel like a drop in the bucket. We might work with somebody who's dealing with alcohol and drugs, and they're making it until they fall off the wagon. That's the risk part of risk-taking mission and service. It's because we're only human. And that is as biblical as you can get. It's like the sower throwing the seeds. There's rocky ground, there are birds that come and they eat it all, and then there's the hard soil, and there's all of that goes on with that parable. But the promise of that parable is that by the grace of God, a harvest comes forth 100-fold. Part of the risk is that this doesn't work a lot of times. We don't see it work a lot of times. The difference we make is something we just don't see. We don't know. We can't see the results sometimes. Who knows how our help and hospitality changes lives? But out of our obedience to Christ and our faith, we have to try. And we have to keep trying, doing it no matter what the effectiveness is. Because Christ calls us into relationships, not results. We're called to be fruitful, and even more fruitful, even when we're not fruitful. The question we must start asking ourselves is a hard and probing question. It's a question about focus. Are we an internally focused church? Are you an internally focused Christian? Or an externally focused church? Or an externally focused Christian? So let me put it to you another way. Holy Cross, what is our impact? If our church were to leave this community tomorrow, would anybody other than ourselves notice? Would anybody care? Would anybody be impacted, affected? I hate the word impact. Excuse me, I don't hate, I dislike that word, impact, so affected. So imagine, even with our after-school program, if it stopped, number one, would the community notice? Would the community care? Or would the community be impacted? And I know the answer to that is a yes, generation after generation here. For all the things I've seen, all the things I've experienced over the years being here. But we have it backward. Most churches blatantly or subtly have this unspoken objective. How can we be the best church in our community? And we staff, we budget, we plan accordingly. But becoming an externally focused church is not about becoming the best church in the community. The externally focused church, the externally focused Christian asks the question, how can we be the best church for our community? And that one little preposition changes everything. In or for. As messengers, we Christians, we have a difficult task. Not because the message of God's good news isn't compelling, but because we aren't always compelling messengers. To love and serve our community, we got to know our community to do that. And to meet their real needs, not the needs that we perceive or assume that they have. We continue to establish relationships and our connections in our immediate community that continue to help us to be an indispensable part of our neighborhood when we're an externally focused church. We ask the questions, how can we do that? Well, we ask. We ask organizations, we ask businesses, we ask schools, we ask neighbors around us, what do they need and how can we help? We find ways to communicate effectively to those outside of our doors, that we are welcoming and affirming of all people, and that we are here to help whatever it takes. But the most important thing is we don't just ask, we don't just talk, we have to act. We have to go. And we would love to have a missions team full of people who love serving others. We'd love to start all the ministry ideas that we have, but we can't without everybody's help. And I mean everybody's help. Everybody's enthusiasm, their initiative, their follow-through, their presence in our community, their gifts, everybody's skills. Because the good news is, the good thing is, God is going to use each and every one of our efforts, our small efforts, our big ones. And it's not just up to us to be the sole people to bring God's kingdom to earth as it is in heaven. Boy, I've heard those words before, haven't you? But it's also not up to us whether we choose whether to be a part of that. It's all of y'all's call. Risks and all. Now, some of y'all are even already involved in amazing ways in mission and service. And for that, I say thank you. But there are other opportunities to get connected to our community in new ways. And we ask these three crucial questions in our community. Number one, what needs are there that have yet to be met? Not what do I have, but what needs are there that have not been met? Number two, what is Christ's purpose for me? And number three, what does God have in store for you? And I want to close with these last couple of thoughts, which means I've only got another 30 minutes to go, so forgive me. The most important thing to remember is to be ready at any moment to give up what you are for what you might become. We might say at Holy Cross, what is Christ calling us to become? Well, I believe that we are ready to move from where we are and where we have been to where Christ wants us to go. But are you ready to risk? Are you ready to go? You see, number two, Jesus never says to the poor, go find a church. No. He says to the church, go into the world and find the poor. Find the hungry. Find the homeless. Find the imprisoned. Find Jesus in his many disguises. So let's decide, despite the risk, that we're ready to go. That we're ready to go looking for Christ. Shall we? Not in spite of the risk, but precisely because of the risk. So let's bow our heads.